Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. I would ask everyone here in-house if you'll be so kind to check that cell phones have been turned off as we prepare to begin. It's always appreciated. And, of course, we will post today's program on the Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference as well. And we remind our Internet viewers on all occasions they can simply email us with questions or comments using the email address of speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our guest today and introducing our program is Becky Norton Dunlop. Mrs. Dunlop serves as as Vice President for External Relations here at the Heritage Foundation and has been a long active member of the conservative community in Washington, D.C. for many years. Please join me in welcoming Becky Dunlop.
Thank you very much, John, and let me add my words of welcome to all of you for being here today. You know, it's always a treat when the Heritage Foundation is able to host someone who doesn't spend every day thinking big thoughts about policy because they work for a think tank. Today we have someone who has spent his life thinking big thoughts about how to make a company successful, influential, desired by the consumer that he's targeting, and it's all worked. And now he has the time to sit back and think those big thoughts about what worked and what didn't work, and look at the world today and say, what can we do to make it work right again? Our guest today is Frank Stronach, who is a successful entrepreneur, business mogul, who's got Canadian and Austrian citizenship. But he has a connection to the United States of America because he has businesses here, manufacturing facilities, and he also owns property because he now is into horse racing and raising of racehorses. And that's an exciting entrepreneurial initiative. He's going to be interviewed today by Mark Tapscott. Mark is the executive editor of the Washington Examiner, and previously he was the editorial page editor of the Washington Examiner. Mark and I have been friends for many years. He served in the Reagan administration as one of our public affairs spokesmen and has had a distinguished career following that time, actually serving here at the Heritage Foundation as the director of our Center for Media and Public Policy. He has done many innovative things in the world of journalism. And most recently, he was inducted into the First Amendment Center's Freedom of Information Act Hall of Fame. So we have a distinguished journalist who's going to interview a distinguished entrepreneur turned successful businessman in many areas, and we're delighted to present this kind of programming. Now I'm going to step off the stage and we're going to run a brief video to really kind of introduce you to the company that Frank started. His book, The Magna, talks all about that, but you know, if you're not steeped in the world of automotive manufacturing, you might not have ever heard of this company. And so I thought it might be prudent for us just to take 2 or 3 minutes here to show this video, and then at the conclusion of the video, Mark and Frank will take their places here on the stage, and Mark will conduct the interview. Following the interview, we will open things up for questions from the audience. And we have a couple of distinguished members of our audience that will be asking questions. I'll introduce them when our program is over. So, without further ado, I'm going to step off the stage and let's run that video.
In 1954, at the age of 21, Frank Stronach arrived in Canada with one small suitcase and not much else. Today, he's changed the way cars are made, and along the way, reinvented the sport of horse racing.
I'm a great believer in luck. The harder I work, the more luck I have.
Sure, he had no more than a few $100s in his pocket, but he had skill, savvy, and a vision.
In my early years, I had no great philosophies. My only drive was never to be hungry anymore.
In 1957, Frank opened his first small factory in Toronto. Times were tough, and he didn't get his first car contract until 1960, an order for 300,000 sun visor brackets. He never looked back.
Do I respect him as a businessman? Absolutely. I respect anybody that starts out sleeping on a bench in a garage.
This is not an easy business, and to build upon success, this is not something you see every day.
He has a good understanding of people and what motivates people. He, says, look, using common sense, what would motivate me?
You know the Magna culture, right? Nobody works for me. You people work with me. I'm working for you.
The roots of the Magna culture began when Frank introduced a profit-sharing plan in his factories. He calls it fair enterprise. Wall Street calls it Frank Stronach's success formula.
The history of mankind has always been dominated by the golden rule. Here's the gold makes the rule. But I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either.
And that's why Frank created a corporate constitution and an employees' charter that are unique in the world of business. In 1960, Frank bought his first horse. And today, he's one of the world's leading thoroughbred owners.
Frank, you and Magna have created so many jobs for people around the world, and in the process have enriched so very many communities. I'm proud to know you. I'm proud of our friendship. I'm proud of the vision you've displayed throughout your business career.
In 1995, Frank was inducted into the Canadian Business Hall of Fame. In 1998, his horse Awesome Again won the Super Bowl of horse racing, the Breeders' Cup. In 1999, he was awarded the Order of Canada. In 2004, he donated $8 million to the local hospital for Aurora and Newmarket, Ontario, and, once again, won the Breeders' Cup with Ghost Zapper. Today, that young tool and die maker who came to Canada 50 years ago is a respected entrepreneur, a community leader, and the premier player in the sport of kings. And along the way, he's done it all his way.
Over $500 million has been raised to help the victims of Hurricane Katrina. Many Canadians have opened up their wallets, including Canadian auto giant mogul Frank Stronach, the founder of Magna. Yesterday, he headed down to Florida to meet with the hundreds of people he's helping by providing them with accommodations at his horse training facility, Palm Meadows.
I can't think of a better guy or a bigger mensch than my friend Frank Stronach. Frank, you and Magna have done so much for communities and charities around the world. Congratulations once again.
I sometimes say, I'm not quite sure yet when I grow up what I will do, There's a lot of pride when you start something from scratch, so you want to look down the road and say, I hope you've put the right foundations in that this company will carry on for the next few hundred years.
Hi. How are you?
Thank you, Becky. I spent 7 of the most productive and rewarding years of my career here at the Heritage Foundation, so it's always good to come back here. When Becky first asked me about interviewing Mr. Stronach here, I immediately jumped at the chance because I covered the auto industry for many years as a journalist. And frankly, knew a great deal about the Magna Corporation and the trials and the great victories that that company has won over the years. So I immediately, as I said, jumped at the opportunity to do this. Mr. Stronach, it is an honor to be able to talk with you today.
Well, it's great to be here.
I'm going to ask you the toughest question that I'm going to ask you today first. When you were a very young man in Austria, you immigrated, I believe you were 14 years old? A little older, a little older.
I was older.
You immigrated to Canada rather than the U.S. Why not the U.S.?
Life is really a question of fate and circumstances. When you be at the right place at the right time, and you got the right ingredients, lots of things can happen. I was, how old was I? I was 21 at the time, and working class background. I had to go someplace where I also could get a work visa. I wanted to see the world, right? And I wasn't rich, so I had to go someplace where I could also work. And I applied for to a lot of countries, to South Africa, Australia, the United States, and Canada. And Canada came through first with a visa. Sometimes I'm very critical about the bureaucrats, the Canadian bureaucrats, but I still think they're the best because they came first forward with a visa, so I wound up in Canada.
But you say you don't believe in luck. That seems like a very lucky thing for Canada that they were ahead of our bureaucrats.
Well,
Frank, come on in.
I do believe in luck, and that reminds me of an old of a story, right? There was an ad in the paper once about a black Labrador being lost, and they gave the description. He was kind of crippled. He was because he was run over by a truck once, and he got a big scar on his back because he was shot by duck hunters at one time. And but anyway, anybody seeing that dog, he's kind of blind, and I think he still can hear. Anybody seeing that dog, he answers by the name of Lucky. Sometimes I feel like that old dog.
When I read that in your book, I have a black lab. I love Labradors. That really struck home with me. I want to ask you something else that perhaps folks have not often asked you when you've been interviewing with people in the media. You are among probably the very few individuals still living who lived under two of the most infamous dictators of the 20th century. You were in Austria at a time when it was dominated by Adolf Hitler's army. And then, of course, when the Soviet army came through and conquered it, you were under Joseph Stalin and his rule. I wonder if you could share with us the thing that most remains in your memory about what it was like to live under those two tyrannies.
Even though at the time I was about 12, 13, by the time the war ended I was 14. But in that age, certain things still stick out. And in hindsight, and even during the thing, you could see a system, the Nazi system, which with very little human rights, etc. I could see that doesn't work, right? And then the war ended, and our region there was then occupied. The English came first, and we were happy that the English came, the English troops, but then that portion was handed over to the Russian troops, and there again it left deep impressions. So I think, as you said, within a short period of time, I got to know different systems, and looking back, I have a good understanding how that works, and like I said, and a few years later, I immigrated to Canada, and I experienced the free enterprise system, and so those are the reasons why I'm happy that I was invited to speak here, and I have to thank Elaine Chao and Toby Road, the former congressman, for inviting me here. And I have a certain age. I don't need anything from anyone, but I think we have a conscience, and my conscience told me I should speak out. I should say the things which I have observed, and we have about 400 factories. That video is kind of old, right? The company is a lot larger now, right? We have, I think, close to 35 billion in sales and about 130,000 employees. Yeah, It's growing, and so anyway, I as in my function as chairman and of Magna, and I was seeing, its growth, and I've visited a lot of countries, and one of my great worries is that most Western countries go towards socialistic philosophies. I want to stress, I come from a working class background.
Your father was very much involved.
Yeah,
as
you
a,
might
as a
say my
union
father
organizer.
was a union organizer, was a communist, right? And before he died, I think he visited me once then in Canada, and I was able to change his mind. That is, well, it's the philosophies, the basic philosophy is okay, but it's totally against human nature. It just won't work, right? So really the question is, we all from time to time should sit back and think, what kind of structure should we have to foster more democracy, more freedom, that people have a better life. And I came to the conclusion, and seeing so many things, right, because having factories in about 30 different countries, that the socialistic philosophies won't work. It just won't work. And we have got some prime examples. Russia got broke by that, right? They could not feed themselves. A great example is East Germany, right? The same people in West Germany, after 40 years of socialism, they could not feed themselves. The infrastructures broke down completely. And the environment got so damaged, right? The rivers and lakes. And so it doesn't, for the simple reason, when state bureaucrats sort of, in a socialistic system, when they get a hold of the system, when they want to control the system, right, their primary thinking is, or their primary action is, to distribute wealth.
Frank, if I may, because you're getting a little ahead of me here.
Okay, all right.
I want you to set the stage for what I'm sure you're about to say. The audience, you will notice these two pictures from his book up here on the screen. And one of them is the very young Frank with a 55 Chevrolet, which caught my eye because my father's first new car was a black 55 Chevrolet. And then the current, I assume it's still the current Magna corporate headquarters in Aurora, Colorado. That is an extraordinary journey that you have made. And I wonder if today, if you were starting today rather than those many years ago, could you do it today?
It be perhaps a little more difficult. That's another concern of mine. It seems the Western countries go more and more away from the real economy. The real economy means making products which you can sell. And I think the real economy provides the most jobs, and I believe it's the only way for wealth creation. But we're going more and more way to financial economies. Financial economies, basically, you trade and you shift financial papers, and there always will be, towards the end, that there's some bad credits. And who usually pays for it? The people pay for it. Huh? So those are some of my great worries, and we got to go back to the real economy, making things. Just for many besides, that's the only way of wealth creation. And we have to understand, if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. And the economy is driven by three forces: smart managers, then hardworking employees, and investors. So in essence, all three really have a moral right to the outcome, which is profits. So what I'm trying to preach always is, employers have a moral right to some of the profits they help to generate. And I think it's another thing which I believe is very important, the gap between the poor and the rich is widening, and that won't work either. So I think we have to devise a system whereby employees, I think it's only natural that they, because without employees you can make a profit, whereby employees could get a portion of the profits. And this is really one of the primary keys I'm here. I don't want to be smart, guys. I don't want to tell Americans how to run their country. And
Everybody else does. You might as well do.
But I have great admiration for America. Everybody in overseas and so on knocks America, but in the final analysis, everyone wants to come to America. So I have great respect for America, and I believe at this time, America is perhaps, in my estimation, the only country, perhaps, where free enterprise can survive. And those are my concerns.
Now, when you mention free enterprise, you spend a great deal of time in your book, which I highly encourage all of you to read. It's not the typical CEO. This man actually wrote this book, and it is very well worth your reading. But you talk a great deal in your book about fair enterprise. And you mentioned at one point you were in Moscow, I believe, and you were talking with an economics official of the Soviet government, and you pulled out a piece of paper and you explained to him the difference between free enterprise and his system and fair enterprise. Could you take us through that very, very quickly?
Yeah, it's quite a subject, but let me try to condense it. The company I started out, after I was born in Austria, and like I said, I wanted to see the world and come from a working class background, so I had to go someplace where I could also get a work visa, and so I arrived with a small suitcase in Quebec City, and that's sort of the northeasterly part of Canada. With I took the cheapest fare I could get. That was an old coal freighter, right? And I was seasick there, right? So arrived in Canada with a small suitcase, $200, and didn't know anybody, and so my English wasn't too bad, so I could, but anyway, that section of Canada is basically French, so they don't want to speak English so anyway, so I finally, when I arrived in that first, I arrived on the ship, and the immigration officer said, do you know anybody in Canada? I said, no. So I said, well, in that case, there is a ticket to Montreal, right, the railroad ticket. So I arrived on the Montreal in the big station with a little suitcase. So I asked people where could there be cheap rooms, right? So I walked for half an hour now, and look, they said, look, if you see a sign in the windows of cheap rooms for rent, so I just knock on the door. So I knocked on a few doors, but I think I kind of looked a little rough just on a boat ride, and so I think in most cases, no, the room was already rented. So, but finally, I did find a room, right? And there was a big recession at the time. It was back in '54, and because I knocked on a lot of factories, no, I couldn't find any work, and I had a friend in Toronto, not a friend, a fellow I know come from a small town, but we all have pride. I didn't want to knock on his door and ask for help. But
now he was from Austria.
He was from Austria,
right.
But it's kind of scary, right? I mean, the last few days I was hungry, and not hungry because I wanted to lose weight. I was hungry because I had no money to buy food. So, and those things leave big impression, right? You never forget things like that. So anyway, I did find, I saved myself to buy a ticket for a Greyhound bus, from Montreal to Toronto, and there I met this fellow, and I remember when I got out of the bus, I hope I had a little piece of paper. I hope he still lives there. And so I kind of kept asking, you know, where such and such street is. So I walked for half an hour while another 20 blocks up there, and they make a right. But finally, after about an hour and 2 hours walking, I did find him. I knocked on the door, and the guy was home. And he said, "Come on in." He said, "You kind of look rough. Are you hungry?"
He recognized you immediately.
I'm sure I'm hungry. Yeah, sure I'm hungry. But anyway, and so life is really a question of fate and circumstances. And he helped me find a job, but there wasn't. So finally I wound up in a hospital, right, in the basement. And I felt so sorry for myself working with all the women. Nothing against all the women. My mother was an older woman, and I liked that. But I was young. I played sort of semi-pro soccer, football, and so I felt sorry for myself. And I remember I went out and do bars or whatever to be amongst young people, and usually the question, "What's your name? Where you from? What you do?" Well, I was working in a hospital. My hands were so smooth from washing dishes, right? They say, "Are you a surgeon?" And sometimes I played along a bit. But towards the end, sometimes when you dance a little closer with the girl, and then, I say, "No, I actually just wash dishes." They don't want to dance so close then, right? So, but anyway, that's the way it goes sometimes in life.
Yeah. Well, your idea of fair enterprise, I had the feeling as I was reading through your book and you described your experiences and how that led to your company's basic charter, that you have a conviction about employees being part of the process and owning part of the results. Is that an accurate, and that's essential to motivating everybody to produce the most at a competitive price?
I think that's the essence, right? The laws of nature are much stronger than any man-made law, and I think the primary reason why people get up in the morning is they want to make a better life for themselves and their family. If we be part of a system where you be recognized, we're not lost, that you have input and be paid accordingly to it, that's what drives the whole system. So over the years, maybe I should get back a little. So when I did finally found a job, I'm a dual time I kept by trade with some engineering background. I did find a job in a very small factory, like there were only about 10 or 12 people, and so I got a job there. After a few months, the owner said to me, "Gee, Frank, you're doing a great job. I would like to have you as my partner," right? My chest swelled a little and thing here. He was a nice fella, actually, but he never wrote down. It never came about it that I could be a partner, but my appetite was quite strong to, I said, there's nothing to do to run a company, and so I could see I couldn't get a partnership there, so I left there and went to a company, worked there where I could make more money. So I lived very simple, a room, the washrooms were out on the floor, right, and so I saved every monies, and after 2 years, I think I had about $8,000 saved up. That was a lot of money times 10, So out I went. I rented a small garage and bought a few old used machines on the down payment, and out I went hustling. I think I was always a little sure of myself, and I couldn't say I was shy. Anyway, I went into factories and I said, "I'm very good in solving problems. If I can't solve the problems, they wouldn't have to pay me." So I get some orders after 1 month. So I hired somebody. After a year, I had about 10 people. After 2 years, I had about 20 people, and just grew. But anyway, I noticed once my foreman acted a little different. He said, "What's the matter with you lately?" His name was Herman, So, well, he said, "Frank," he says, I'm thinking I would like to start also my own business. And I said, "Well, I understand," but I said, "Let me think about it. Maybe I can offer you something which would satisfy that interest." So anyway, that evening I was talking to myself and Said if that foreman's gonna leave me, that would stifle my growth. That I didn't like that. If that foreman would leave me, I could do all the work by myself then. I even liked that less. And the other thing was, if that foreman's gonna leave me and I hire somebody new, and I don't show him how a business is run, I still gotta do all the work. So anyway, the next day I said to my foreman, I said, look, why don't we start a new factory together? You get a third, I have 2/3. No more overtime, we get a base salary. And by the end of the year, we take pro rata out a portion of the profits. And so the guy said, do you mean it? I said, yes. So we went right away to
And you wrote it down?
Yeah, we wrote it down and we signed it, and the guy worked like crazy, right? That was his factory, right? He was a separate factory, and so I said, gee, business is easy. So I took the next foreman over the next 2 years. The next one, all of a sudden, I had about 8 factories, and and then I could see this enormous growth, right? And I could also see, this is just about the time when the Canadian-American free trade, auto trade pact came about, and I saw this huge opportunities out, and the enormous confrontations between unions and workers, right? And I said, there gotta be a better way, so I figured I should be a public company, so I can let the workers participate too, right? And because it's very difficult in a private company, like if workers and maybe the company doesn't make a profit at the time, it's difficult. So it's easier if you have a public company, right? So I converted the thing into a public company, and the workers participated on it and with the profits, and so I developed then a corporate constitution, a corporate charter of rights, and a labor charter of rights.
And that's been the basic structure of your company ever since.
That's been the basic structure of the thing here, right?
I knew you were going to pull that out.
And there's some leaflets where we describe what the corporate charter gonna be, and the basic basically the corporate charter, the corporate constitution will spell out that without workers we couldn't make a profit. So it's only fair and twice they get a portion. So in our case it was 10%. So 10% to the workers, 20% to the shareholders in the form of a dividend, 6% to management, 7% to research. Research is the foundation for the future, and 2% to charity. A lot of the charity money went into sporting organizations, right? So anyway, and so we adhered to the charter, and that basically was the foundation. I think the key is that the employees have to be motivated. The heart has to be into it. And that will only work if it's completely transparent. Huh?
And if they have a stake.
And they have a stake. In our case, we had the 10%, approximately half he got in shares, and the other half he got in cash. And that was the foundation. And look, we're very competitive, and for a lot of people they couldn't quite understand how can a company grow that much. But it is an enormous force, right? When employees feel they own a part of it, and they got and everything is transparent, there's an enormous energy, and there's an enormous capability. Every person, if the system doesn't suppress it, right? So I've unleashed or unchained, right? The human energies in people, right? And it's still growing, right?
If you were to say, let me come at this a little differently. You have a lot to say in your book about unions and bureaucrats. And some of it's positive, most of it is not so positive. I wonder if you went to the United Auto Workers today, let's say, and said, guys, I want to do this in all of the companies that your workers are in, what would they say?
First of all, I want to spell out very clearly in any one of my sayings, or written or verbally, I've never said there shouldn't be unions.
That's
Society
true.
needs
That's true.
balance, because for me, balance maybe is my most important word in my vocabulary, right? If the jungle hasn't got balance, nothing will work unless there's balance. I just said to the union leaders, presidents, I met them all, right? I said, look, we all got to change. We have a responsibility running a company, running a union, because we have thousands and thousands of workers. So we have to change. And maybe the unsung heroes of society are the old-time union leaders, huh? Because they stuck out their neck and many got beaten up.
Absolutely.
And, you know.
Absolutely.
Okay, but we have to change. We constantly have to look, how can we build a better society? And in a way, I think the world is a small piece of real estate, and there's a great trend towards global economies of getting to know each other better, understanding each other better, avoiding wars, etc., 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 right? Those are all good things. But at the same time, that will take many, many years before we have an ideal world, right? And to have an ideal world, you gotta figure out, you gotta have principles. You gotta think about various structures. How can we create a better world? I don't want to be rich and have bodyguards, and I want to go in the pub. I want to be amongst the people. So, but if the gap gets too, then that could lead to unrest, etc., etc.
But here's what I'm not clear on, and I really would appreciate it if you could clear this up for me. Traditionally, the union has, especially in America, has an adversarial relationship with management. In your experience and the way you've set up Magna, there's not this adversarial relationship, or certainly not nearly as much, because you've given the workers a stake, a concrete stake in the future of the company. So it's more of a cooperative relationship. Is that accurate?
That is right. Like look, I come from a working class background. When I had the first factory, I had my brown lunch bag, and we sat on the workbench and we talked about everything, right? So I built this environment, right? And I showed him my bank book and I said, look, this is what's in it. If you do this job a little faster, right? There's a profit in there for you guys as well. So I built up and the unions wanted to come in, and our workers just were totally against it, right? But on the other hand, when you grow that, like when you have about 130,000 people, you don't know the people anymore that personally, right? So you need systems, right? Mm-hmm. Whereby we leave our factories relative small, right? Maybe 400 or 500 people might be ideal. The factories could be very large because you have automation and robotics, but it's very important that management must be in touch with workers, because everybody sees the world from their point of view, right? But what I was trying to do is I went to the union leaders. I knew all the presidents, so I went to the Canadian auto president for the
Mr. Hargrove.
Buzz Hargrove, and great guy. I mean, when you shake hands with him, you don't have to look back. But he was a very strong union leader, and but we had mutual respect for each another because he knew my background. But anyway, I went to him. I said, Buzz, I said, the two of us have a lot of responsibility. If we leave things the way they are, there won't be no jobs here in Canada. I said, we have to, you people, your structures have to change and our structures have to change. Ours have more or less changed already, right? So I said, look, I have no problem inviting you in some of our factories. But we got to work, certain things are very important to us. The corporate constitution is important to us. The corporate constitution, again, is how the profits are divided. You know, the crux in the world has always been the creation of capital and its distribution. And this still is the crux, right? So I said the corporate constitution is not negotiable. Because there you couldn't really say it, which our labor charter of rights guaranteed the workers the wages got to be average to the competitors within the region.
Right.
And so he could not really say that. How can he beat that workers get a percentage in profits, right? So he said, I can live with that, right? So anyway, we worked for a few months, and we call it a structure of fairness based on social economic justice. Social economic justice. So finally we did have I usually like to have agreements maybe 10 or 20 pages.
You wrote it down.
It still was an agreement about 50 pages. But he said to me, Frank, I hope I get it through. I'm not sure I'm going to get it through. For me, it was a little easier. I went into the factories and said to the workers, they were not too enthusiastic, but I said, look, we have to try to find a better balance, right? And so I got it through, with a few factories. And they voted for it, and so far it's working fine. But again, it's an example. What can we do? Because adversarial, it's difficult to be competitive under the best of conditions. Adversarial is such a waste of energy, right? So we constantly got to find ways which are fair. And this is where, let's say, first of all, I'm a free enterprise. Without free enterprise, you can't have a free society. But I think it's very important that we develop the basic principles, what we call the fair enterprise. Right. The basic principle of fair enterprise are the human charters of rights alone are not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. Economic charters of rights will lead to economic democracies, and economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. Okay, so again, my conscience tells me that I should try to provoke the minds of people. And I'm not saying I have the answers for everything, but I'm saying this is as we have opened up actually a think tank in Washington, right? There's a lot of think tanks, and they're always thinking, but they never do anything, right? The purpose
Does that sound familiar?
The purpose of a think tank is to analyze a segment of society, try to find the facts, try to find the present condition and support it with facts and say, can we do it better? Can we do it better, right? And again, with facts, right? And so that brings me really to the core message. For me, I do have a concern that our governments, or that in Western countries, that our governments more and more preoccupied with distributing wealth.
Rather than creating
You
wealth.
cannot distribute anything, you got to create it first. That is a fundamental, that's a law of nature. Okay? And for me, it would be very easy, right? I would say, if I would have something to say in the White House, I would say, listen, you businessman, you know better how to run your business, we won't interfere. But I tell you what, Mr. Businessman, if you invest your profits in America, you only pay 15% tax, and you must give it to your employees. If you want to invest overseas, fine. It's a free country. You pay the normal tax, the complete tax, which is about approximately 40%. You know what that would mean to America? Right now, it's an incentive for corporation to move offshore. It's
Insane.
it doesn't make sense. Short-term sense, we'll share all the summer and push, but for the long run, it does not make sense for American people or for American business.
On that note, Frank, I know I could sit here and ask you questions all afternoon, but I know there are a bunch of folks here who would also like to ask you a question. Beginning with, I believe, Congressman?
Yes, that's right. We have Congressman Andy Barr here from Kentucky, and he's not exactly a constituent, but he has constituent property in your district, I believe.
That's right. Mr. Stronach, thank you for coming here. And among the many attributes that I admire about you, two stand out. Number one,
A nice farm.
That's right. Number one is your belief that human progress and prosperity is rooted in private enterprise and hard work and free markets. The second is what you mentioned, your farm in my congressional district in central Kentucky, in Bourbon County, Kentucky. We call it the horse capital of the world. And if you'll indulge me for just a minute thank you. If you'll indulge me for a minute for the audience here, I'd like to read a paragraph from your book that describes my congressional district and your farm. One of the places this is you speaking in the book, one of the places I thoroughly enjoy is my horse farm in Bourbon County, Kentucky. It's true bluegrass country, known the world over for its stud farms and its whiskeys. My preferred time of year to go there is spring. It's lush and green with rolling fields as far as the eye can see. In the cool early hours of the morning when the sun is coming up and the fog is still hanging over the blue-tinted grass, it has almost a mystical feel. Spending a few days there watching the stallions racing through the fields recharges my mind and my body, and I always leave my Kentucky farm feeling completely reinvigorated. And so my question to you is, obviously you draw great inspiration from the beauty of the landscape and the farm and the horse industry and the signature horse industry in Kentucky. But what lessons have you learned over the years as an entrepreneur, not just with Magna and auto manufacturing, but in the thoroughbred industry? What lessons do you draw from the thoroughbred industry that you can amplify your message today?
Well, the thoroughbred industry is it is somewhat a different industry. I think you need also industries which are entertainment, which a lot of activities. I think we're all born a little bit with a gaming instinct. Okay, it just happens. I own a whole bunch of racetracks, right? San Francisco, Los Angeles, Miami, Baltimore, and Laurel here. And
did not know that. You've got a bunch of my money, Frank.
I'm open to get more. So anyway, when I had horses first. I worked 7 days a week, from about 7 o'clock till 9 o'clock at night, pretty well, right? And after 5 years, I had some monies in the bank, right? Because once when you be hungry, and you have no monies to buy food, that leaves such deep impression that you say, I never ever want to be in that situation again. So I worked 5 years like crazy. Then I figured, gee, I like cowboy. I like Jane Wayne when you rode out in the sunset, so I figured it'd be nice to have a farm, right? I really had no involvement with horses, so I looked in the papers, writing horses for sale. So I went to the first farm, with an ad. I went there, and he showed me, the farmer showed me what horse, so I put a saddle on. I was pretty sporty, right? And started to ride, I started to jump, right? And 8 times I held on by the ears, right, when they slid forward, right, but I didn't fall off. But anyway, so he took me to the racetracks, and I bought some broodmares, I bought some yearlings, and in that thing I had also a chance to see racetracks, huh? They had nice director's room with lush food, right, but back in the grandstand, the hamburgers, the hot dogs, I said, this is no way to run a thing here, right, okay? And so that industry hasn't realized that much other entertainment industry came up, and thereby the racing industry has really lost on spectators and all the way around, right? So again, it was a question. To make a product or service, right? You constantly gotta service people or provide a product, and my main motto was always a better product for better price, a better service for a better price. So I started to, and all the barns were run down, and people lived in bad conditions, right? So I built some new, like Gulfstream Park. I built some nice dorms. I built new barns. I built, and I built some great eating places. So it's, and we do say, or we in the racing farms or in the racing programs, you say gamble with care, right? Don't gamble your grocery monies, but at the same time, sometimes where else can you go where I could have lunch or dinner and gamble a few dollars, and you could walk away with less than you came there, right? So we have a lot of catching up to do, because especially Kentucky, the economy is the horse industry is a great bearing there. So there's lots of room to do there. And I think I set an example with Gulfstream Park. I know if seen Gulfstream Park, I tore everything down and built it brand new, and I'm just putting a plaza there, right? It's dedicated to the horse. Call it Equine Paradiso. And part of the thing, I built a destination center. It's the largest bronze sculpture in the world. It's a bronze horse, a Pegasus. It's in its bum we have a 4D movie, right? It's 130 feet tall, right? And I built around a horse museum, and then a horse theater, right, where the Western culture is still very strong in America, and that's great, right? So we can have horse shows and all kinds of. So it's dedicated a plaza because I believe horses have played a great role in the human race without the West, without the horse. So, and I think there I really give tribute to the horses what they did for mankind, right? So their belt is gigantic and all the way around. So it'd be a pet project of mine.
Becky, how are we doing on time?
We just have time for just a few questions.
Just a few.
Let's go ahead, and if people need to leave, we'll understand, but let's go ahead and ask some questions.
Yes, sir.
Would you have been able to succeed? Would you have been able to succeed in your business ventures to the same degree if you had stayed in Europe and tried to proceed with business there?
No, when you mean the bureaucracy, there is you got to fill out so many forms. It's, Europe's gone socialistic, huh? Imagine, if parents, right? I'm talking now of Austria, where I was born, and I came back, and my friends, I did run for politics there, created a party, got in parliament, but I always said, I'm just going to be a short-term in there, because I don't need a job, I don't need a medal. I just said to the people, look, I want to provoke that they think, but just as an example, parents had got no right to appoint the school director in a school. And even crazier yet, that school director could not even appoint the teachers. So the kids are raised in a socialistic kind of environment, right? If a company makes a profit, right, then you got to take advantage of somebody. How can you make a profit? A company which doesn't make a profit is a burden to society. A company's gotta stay with all the rules and with all that, and not to harm the environment, and that's a safe environment. But it's crazy. There's no way. There's no way. And the reason I spent some time and some of the monies, I wanna say, you gotta think about it. When you see other countries, don't take the free enterprise for granted. And because without free enterprise, it's very difficult.
I think we have time for one more question. Who's the lucky person?
Right here in front of you.
Right ahead.
Hi, you're going to feel like you're being tag team with racing people. We haven't seen each other in 12 years. I archived Santa Anita and photographed finishes before I went over to Europe. My concern is, as you share how the racing attendance has dropped, maybe you could express a little bit about the value of a racetrack to a community through construction, food, curtains, agriculture, economically, and how technology is disrupting.
Quickly, to work is sometimes neighborhoods have had a racetrack, all kinds of, but anybody working at a racetrack has to be licensed. They have got a very clean record, right? And most of them really love horses. So the economy, I think there's about close to 1 million people directly involved in the horse industry. That includes Western horse, et cetera, right? And the horse industry could be one of the greatest export commodities in the United States, because let's say the pure lottery is really a taxation of the poor. How many see the slot machines, et cetera, whereby the spin-off effect on jobs for horses is enormous. The farmers left, the implement makers, and so on, and green space will be preserved. So the spin-off effect is so much more than the other lotteries and all that stuff, right? So anyway, it's about direct. It's about 1 million, and then there might be another indirect, maybe 2 million. It's a huge segment, and most of all, the key is we have to be like drinking and everything. It's a question of education. Say don't gamble. Gamble a little, make a budget, and you make a budget. Not like governments do, right? You need budgets, we allocate what you should do, right? So that's a question of education. But I think what would the world be without horses, especially little girls? I mean, they love horses, right? Okay. But anyway, if we run out of time, maybe invite me back once more, and then we can answer more questions.
Absolutely.
Well, let me thank you, Frank, so much for coming, and Mark, I just greatly appreciate your taking a chunk out of your day to come over and do this interview. I think it added a lot to our program. We do have copies of Frank's book. If you are an intern, we're going to provide them to you at no cost. The other ones are priced at $10, which is very modest, and I believe Frank would be happy to autograph them for you if you'd like to pick one up outside. I do want to say in closing that we didn't talk about everything in Frank's book. There's a lot of good ideas in there, and the Heritage Foundation, Frank, is a do tank as well as a think tank, and a lot of the things that we champion are the kinds of reforms that Frank has touched on this morning. The point I think that I want to leave you with is the point that he made about economic freedom leading the way. If you have economic freedom, it leads to political freedoms. And the challenge that we face in the United States today is coming up with some of the reforms that are necessary to allow entrepreneurs, people who are entrepreneurs in their heads and in their hearts, to actually become successful in the United States today. So thank you once again for being here. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Frank. This has really been a very interesting discussion and leaves us with a lot of food for thought and a desire to go to Laurel. Thank you very much.